Right. Thank you so much to the IT team for playing um, the documentary that we have produced as an outcome of our results and the findings. Moving on, I would like to begin with the panel discussions. And the first panel discussion is on the prospects of renewable energy in Pakistan, opportunities, challenges, and the way forward. We are really fortunate and pleased to be joined by the relevant stakeholders from nearly all of the departments from Ministry of Energy, private sector, academia, and the World Bank. To begin with, I would like to invite Ms. Farzana Altaf. She's a DG Park Environmental Protection Agency under the Ministry of Climate Change. So she has Masters of Science in Biochemistry from Qaid-e-Azam University and has been serving as a DG Park EPA, authoring environmental strategy for reconstruction and rehabilitation of environmental damages. We would like to have her intervention on the prospects of renewable energy in Pakistan, opportunities and challenges in terms of environment, and how does she propose short to medium or medium to long-term solution for Pakistan. So Ms. Farzana, if you could unmute, please.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much, and Assalamu alaikum, and good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you to STPI for extending this invitation to Pak EPA and for sharing this important occasion. As far as this nexus of the energy and environment is concerned, I think first we need to look into the possibility in the national context and then in the international context. What are the present options available with us to go for the alternate or renewable energy resources? Rather, I will, instead of alternate, as a part of the environmental team of Pakistan, I will use the term renewable energy resources. And still, I think in Pakistan, although we always claim that Pakistan is not one of those countries who are responsible for emission of the greenhouse gases and other carbon emissions, but still we are vulnerable to all these emissions. So on the basis of this, the second question arises, are we educated enough to understand the need of the non-renewable energy resources or renewable energy resources difference and its utilization in the country? If I look into the very basic theme or very basic source of the energy, which is available abundantly in Pakistan, that is a sun. And use of the sun energy for the generation of energy has now emerging based on the need. I will not say over here that so far we have been successful in formulating a policy about the exploring solar energy options in the country in response to the need basis and then in response to the protection of environment. Rather, mostly it is being done by the community at the small scale on the basis of their need when they are not getting the continuous supply of the energy, and then cost. If they are paying more cost to the other sources of the energy, then they are opting this solar energy option. Then, and solar energy option can be introduced in Pakistan at national level, and conversion of so many buildings and so many sources towards solar panel is very important. Second, when we talk about wind energy, obviously we have very good corridors, and I do remember about 15 years back, a study was conducted in Pakistan about the different corridors of the wind energy, and still we have not been so successful in using all those available corridors, and except one corridor in Karachi, Dhambarchi or something like that, and then in Thatha, that is near to Thatha area. That corridor is being used successfully, but in the other part of the countries, and especially near the sea level, this is need to use it. Hydro power, although we are very familiar with this phenomena since the establishment of the Tarbela Dam and then Mangla Dam, and how much our generation of the energy is dependent on these two major hydro resources. And still we are developing and working on the Amir Basha Dam, Dasu Dam, then Mohammed Dam, and we have so far abundant water resources available. But looking into the climate change impact in the long term, and sustainability of these resources is one of the major challenge. And unforeseen disasters happening in this sector, sometime flooding and sometime other glacier melting and this phenomena, and exploring new small-scale hydropower generation project is one of the challenge and one of the need of the time. After this, if I talk a new concept, as you all are familiar about the introduction of the e-vehicle policy by the Ministry of Climate Change in the country, and in the recent budget there is a provision about it, e-vehicle. I think it's a time we should start working on the hydrogen fuel as well. This will be a future need, and this could be one of the available source of the energy in the future. And the most important, which we cannot capture in Pakistan, is a geothermal. Still, we don't find such opportunity, and we are not doing any research about this. So my urge and my expectation from this summit is that we should start working on the exploration of the such renewable energy resources which are available in Pakistan, and learning from the international experiences and international expertise and their policies. Instead of reinventing the wheel, we should get the benefit of those research being done in other countries and start targeting our hotspots in the country where we can use these renewable energy resources. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Farzana, especially to highlight the EPA policy and start working on the hydrogen fuel as an alternative as well. Moving on, I think I would like to give a floor to Mr. Mohammed Faisal Sharif, Director Projects Appraisal PPIB, for his remarks on the prospects of renewables in Pakistan and what could be the way forward to overcome the challenges that we have discussed since this morning and through the report that we have just launched.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to speak on this forum, and I appreciate STPI for the efforts to call all the stakeholders to speak and discuss the challenges and then possible way forward to make this clean energy transition successful in Pakistan. So I think it's the right time because our energy sector is going under massive transformation from thermal dominating fuel landscape towards cleaner and greener energy future. So thank you. And definitely the transformation from fossil fuels toward clean energy is a major task, and the Pakistan as a country is right now entering into two transformation. So it make it more complex. Like the first is energy transformation from fossil fuels toward the clean and green energy, and the second is electricity market transformation from single buyer towards multiple buyers wholesale electricity markets. So we have to carefully watch the impact of these two transitions on overall economics and development of the sector. Energy transition from fossil fuels toward clean energy is even challenging for developed countries, but it's more challenging for Pakistan due to a number of macroeconomic electricity infrastructure issues. Despite the fact that Pakistan as a country has very low share of carbon emissions, carbon emissions like 0.98 metric ton, which is multiple times lower than the neighboring and other developed countries. But even then, the government of Pakistan has shown strong commitments towards clean and green energy by announcing number of environment-friendly policies, including ARE policy, setting targets of 30% renewable by 2030, electricity vehicle policies, energy efficiency targets, then large-scale plantation under flagship program of Prime Minister of Pakistan under Clean and Green Pakistan, and then major transformation from cost plus tariff regime to competitive auctions and multiple wholesale electricity markets. So PPIB as a major implementing agency and a major stakeholder of government of Pakistan has been working very proactively to promote the indigenous energy in overall energy mix. And if we talk about our portfolio, like so far we have developed 17,000 megawatts projects of almost 40 IPPs with a share of clean energy, particularly the hydro energy of 1.9%. But if we look at our future portfolio, that is comprising of 22 power projects of more than 12,000 megawatts, we have the indigenous share of more than 85% and includes hydro as 51%. So that shows the commitments of governments and its implementing agencies to moving away from fossil fuels towards the clean energy sources. If we look at IGSF, which has recently been submitted to NEPRA, and NEPRA has already held a hearing on it, the carbon emissions against power sector is standing at 350 kilogram per kWh. And with all these initiatives, we are expected to achieve a further carbon reduction, and that will be standing at around 200 by 2030. So that will be a major achievements in terms of environment and clean energy. In terms of energy mix, we are expecting 57% of clean energy by 2030. And in terms of energy generation, we are expecting more than 80%, around 90% of energy production from indigenous energy sources, which includes some of the third coal projects. But even then, 74% are from renewable and clean and hydro energy sources. Even then, there are some challenges, some major challenges, which we have, all the stakeholders need to take on upfront, because it's a major transformation. And one of the major challenges, like the committed projects. We have number of committed projects in the long-term concession agreements, and further the IGSF, which has recently been submitted, have very limited share to optimize the clean energy, clean and renewable energy share, and that's why we have 12% of total projects which are going to be added during next 10 years are the candidate projects, whereas 88% are committed projects. So that leaves a limited space for new renewable energy projects. But overall, it has 60% share if we include the hydro by 2030. So keeping in view these two transformations, we need to improve our grid infrastructure and transmission distribution network. And PPIB as an implementing agency have a strong focus on the development of hydro as well as the new transmission line projects in the country through competitive auction process. And for that, they have already working on the development of request for proposal and security package to advertise some transmission line projects for the private sector, and then some hydro projects through tariff-based bidding. So we, in view of CTBCM and the energy transition, we need a capacity building of various institutions working in government sector to undertake this transformation. Further, we have to move away from the long-term concession agreements towards the bilateral contracts under the new market model. So for that, we need a financial sustainability of discourse, so they can manage their contracts, bilateral contracts with the power generation, new power generation facilities. And in future market, PPIB will have a role of independent auction administrator to procure power generating capacity on behalf of discourse through competitive auction process, and we'll also be providing guarantees for the weak discourse. So second biggest challenge is to move away from these guarantees and to propose some alternative mechanism, so that to bring financial sustainability in the power sector. So all our policies in the energy sector are aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 7 and with the Paris agreements. Though the objective of these two mechanisms are somehow conflicting, because we need more energy to meet the energy demand, but at the same time we have to produce less carbon emissions. So that's make it more challenging. So a very careful policy review and structural changes in a regulatory framework need to be deliberated to have to achieve these targets. And STPI, I think the STPI is carrying out a research on these clean energy transition that will bring some recommendations and some way forward for the policymaker to take into account while going forward. So with this, I thank you again, STPI, for holding this discussion, and we look forward to have some valuable recommendation from these panel discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shiraz. I would just like to, sorry, Firaz, Faisal Saab, for your remarks. I would like to move on to Dr. Fatima Khushnud now. She's a General Manager, Business Development at Engro Energy. And the proposed question would be about the role of the private sector in this clean energy transition, and what kind of challenges probably the private sector face in this as a barrier to upscale investments, including financial investments as well, and the support from the government. So I would just like to give a floor to Dr. Fatima for her interventions.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Hina. It's always a pleasure to be part of such discussions at SDPI. And I think they're doing a commendable job by bringing us all together, both the private sector and the government sector, because the first thing that we need to do whenever we are trying to resolve an issue is to identify, and for that such discussions play a very pivotal role. So I would like to acknowledge that, Dr. Hina. Moving on to the question, I think as much as green energy transition and environmental sustainability is absolutely critical, what we need to be very mindful of for a country like Pakistan, we have a financial sustainability as priority. So I think when it comes to financial sustainability versus the environmental sustainability, we need to be very mindful that we cannot have financial sustainability on the back burner. We need to be very mindful of that at the very same level as we take our environmental sustainability. Talking about the challenges, I think what I would like to highlight from a private sector standpoint is whenever we like to invite, or whenever we like to look at the private sector investors, there are certain key elements that we need to be very mindful of, which I would like to highlight one by one. Like the first one is the sanctity of contracts, which is absolutely critical. Then comes your consistency of policies, and then finally the enabling investment environment. When we talk about the sustainability and consistency, why is it so important? That's because whenever you look at the investors, they actually look at the enabling investment environment. They do take these things into consideration. And if at any point in time these consistency of policies and the sanctity of contracts are not maintained, this actually adds to your risk premium. And whenever such risk premiums are added, the returns go higher. So investors do expect higher returns when they want to invest in the same market. And if you look at the power sector, our issues basically is reliability and affordability. And affordability is directly linked to this risk premium elements which are being added by the investors. So I think we really need to focus on these three key elements, which basically will help us to bring in these renewable projects at not only a cost effective rates, but also to ensure the environmental sustainability. Then again, I think it was repeatedly discussed, the IGCEP and then the 60% target that we are trying to achieve. Again, within IGCEP, as much as our committed projects and our candidate projects are all focusing towards renewables, we do have to be very mindful of our target consumer tariffs. That is something which is pretty much missing, and without that piece of the puzzle in the IGSEP, I doubt that we can actually achieve we can definitely achieve our renewable targets, but at the price which is affordable to our consumers. Is that something we are targeting as well? That needs to be taken into account as well whenever we are talking about such long-term plans. Similarly, I think another very important element when we talk about including renewables is our transmission network. That is something which again plays a very key role, because unless your transmission network is upgraded enough to support your renewable energy, it's just like having your renewable generation in place, but then your inability to utilize that using the current transmission network. So that's something which is again very important from a private sector point, that you can actually look at the investment into the renewables, but then you need to be equally confident on the fact that the renewable generation that you're investing in, it'll actually be used as well. With the current transmission network, I doubt that we have that ability right now to evacuate the entire renewable power. So while we are working towards this 60% target for the renewables, we need to be mindful of our transmission network to be up to par with this entire change or transition that we are moving towards. Similarly, coming on to the challenges, like I think when we look at the power sector, our critical issues is the reliability and affordability. And if we look at our past 2010 onwards, the reason why most of our industrial consumer moved away from the grid was basically the expensive power and the reliability. For that, over the years, we have moved on towards a market liberalization reforms, which Faisal also mentioned. That's something that we are transitioning towards. And CTBCM, I would like to acknowledge NEPRA for taking such immaculate and such pro-market and pro-private sector initiatives. CTBCM framework has been approved, and it's going to be like up and running by April 2022. While that is the target, meanwhile we see that the supplier regulations and the trader regulations, IGSEP, all such initiatives are being taken on. We did have a hearing on the supplier regulations, which is a part, which is a key part in moving towards this transition. Wheeling regulations is another initiative of NEPRA, which obviously is facing some resistance, rather a lot of resistance from the discourse. That is something that needs to be addressed, because when we talk about the private sector to be a part of this entire transition, we need to provide that enabling environment as well. For that, wheeling regulations in the short term is something which is very critical. So I think that needs to be allowed to ensure that the power that is available at affordable rates can be passed on to the industrial consumers. That's the only way to bring the captive power back to the to the grid, or to actually give them that confidence that they can utilize a cheaper power source. Otherwise, I think we all know that the reason that they moved to captive was this affordability and reliability issues. Having said that, when we talk about the short term and medium term transitions, I think we have been in this single buyer model for way too long now, and we have tried, we have tested, and we know that this is not working, at least not for Pakistan. So as a first step, we need to move away from this single buyer model, which obviously will be happening in CTBCM in 2022 eventually. But we need to take small steps right from now, and for that, giving the access, the private sector access to the market is absolutely critical and need of the hour. I cannot emphasize enough that till that happens, we cannot really see this power sector changing, as much as the generation is a very important and critical part. There are other key market reforms that we need to focus on towards. Wheeling regulations is one of them. And obviously, once the private sector is allowed that access to the industrial consumers, that's not only going to help us bring them back to the grid, but also that'll help our exports in terms of when we all know that for our industrial consumers, electricity is one of the highest raw material costs. So we need to bring that down, and for that we need to give access to cheaper electricity to our industry. Obviously, reliability comes hand in hand with that. For that, since private sector is in equation, but they are being restricted because of the single buyer model, so we need to give them that access so our industry can boost, our exports can pick up, and obviously this all will contribute towards the GDP growth, which eventually is the mandate for our incoming finance minister as well. If you look at the way he has built the narrative while taking over, it's all about moving towards a growth strategy and rather than a sustainable strategy. So I think that is something which is key. The challenges that we face as the private sector is again the single buyer model, the wheeling regulations, which is being jeopardized by the stays and by the discourse. So I think that is something we need to follow. Coming back to renewables, it's very important to enable our transmission network and bring it at par with the generation, because unless we only focus on generation, we might be able to switch to a cleaner mix, but we'll still be facing the issue of evacuating that power which is available at a cheaper source, but cannot really be utilized because of the transmission issues. Last but not the least, I think distribution network, it's a known fact that needs to be fixed, because that's where our majority of the inefficiencies lie, and which adds to the cost. I would just like to conclude by saying that single buyer model is not going to work. Private sector, if you want the private sector to come into the renewables, into these market reforms, government needs to step away from the government business and let the market decide on the supply and demand, and that will eventually bring our tariffs in line as well, which will boost our industry and which eventually will move our exports to a better levels, and everything will contribute towards the GDP growth of the country. Thank you, Hina.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fatima, highlighting the challenges that the private sector would face, and I think they play a crucial role in this when you talk about upscaling renewables, and so really important to have enabling investment environment for them, consistency in policies, and looking into overcoming the challenges in transmission and the distribution sector inefficiencies. I'll just quickly move on and give a floor to Dr. Irfan Yusuf. He's a consultant renewable energy in NEPRA and had served for AEDB, Alternative Energy Development Board, for 16 years, and now working with NEPRA in introduction of distributed generation, including net metering, market regulations, preparing guidelines, and developing implementation mechanisms. And we would love to hear about the challenges and the implementation challenges being faced in these new reforms and the guidelines being made in the renewable energy deployment in Pakistan. So over to you, Dr. Irfan.
Thank you, Dr. Hina. It's always a pleasure to be a part of such discussions that you have led, and I'm very thankful to you.
Yeah.
Is it okay? Can you hear me now? From my side, it's
yes, we can hear you now.
That's great. Okay, thanks, Dr. Hina, for providing the opportunity. It's always a pleasure for myself to be part of such initiatives of SDPI, and I'm also thankful to providing me this forum where which is represented by a number of experts from the power sector. From the regulator's perspective, it is very important to see how the market transformation is going to happen. You might be knowing that the market liberalization was a subject that was already in the NEPRA Act when it was designed in 1997. There were some things which left behind while there was design. That's why the government thought of bringing in some changes in it in 2018, and accordingly concepts of suppliers, traders, and the generators, and also linking the distribution network to only the wire business was introduced. Well, while doing so, the NEPRA Act, as well as the recently approved National Electricity Policy, has put a lot of emphasis on the liquidity in the power sector. This is an important segment which calls for the sustainability of the power sector, without which it would be difficult for the government to run the business in the power sector. It is rightly stated previously that the government has to switch out from the business of the generation and transmission in the power sector. Dr. Fatma has built a very good case in this regard and has given a perspective that why the government should step away from this business. However, as everybody knows, there is a legacy contract that has been signed by the government of Pakistan, and there is a whole sum of capacities is coming around, which in terms of called as a committed power projects, and somebody has to take care of it. There are some commitments under the contracts that have been negotiated and signed by the power purchaser. We have to honor those contracts. These are long-term contracts and we have to keep them alive to the life of the projects. In addition, of course, there are some reliability issue. We, being the custodian of the regulatory regime of the power sector, we have to ensure that the infrastructure is reliably serving the consumers. We have to maintain the financial viability, aggregate liquidity, efficiency, and climate resilience in the electricity sector. Given that, we are very cautious about the calamities of climate change, and we feel that with the large introduction of renewable power, including large hydro, is going to serve a good purpose for managing the emissions. Everybody would be knowing that electricity sector in Pakistan is one of the largest contributors in the emissions that's coming out of Pakistan. And under the Paris Agreement, the government of Pakistan has already committed that it will be reducing around 20% of emissions from the country by 2030. And Mr. Climate Change can rectify this statement that under the ambitious targets being developed by the Ministry of Climate Change, there are going to be a huge sum of things which are coming around, and that will become an obligation for the government of Pakistan to cut down the emissions. And this commitment can only be met if and only if we introduce renewable power into the sector, without which, if we keep on relying on the fossil fuels, our commitment is not going to happen and not going to be realized. Electric vehicles, yes, this is one of the segments which is so coming up as a new business in the power sector. We are very well cognizant to the overall mechanisms that's going to happen. The demand side increase, the business incubations, the new requirements for the infrastructure. We are working on with the stakeholders for the purposes of establishing the EV charging infrastructure all over Pakistan. This is going to create a demand of electricity, and in order to cope up with this increasing demand, we need to have adequate supplies. These supplies are going to be met through, of course, new generations that's coming up, that the IGSEP. Being regulator, we feel that it's our responsibility that each and every citizen should be provided an access of affordable electricity, and giving that things as a responsibility of the regulator, we are coming up with regulations for microgrids. This is, we feel, one of the most advanced way to invite the investment in those areas where a grid is not available, and we can have private sector participation to a grid to develop the microgrids and having electricity access in remote areas, particularly in Balochistan and in the Sindh province and the Gilgit-Baltistan. From if we go by the policy mechanisms in the ARE policy, This is a very ambitious policy, as it states itself, 20% share by 2025 and 30% by 2030. It calls a lot of interventions and new developments in the sector. As it has been highlighted that government has to step away from the power purchases. We are also looking at this option once the market is open, how the generation and distribution and supply business is going to happen. Of course, the private sector will be having a lot of potential to develop all those generation capacities, and it would not be requiring government sector procurements in the long run. However, for the short to medium term, government has to make available certain capacity that would enable the supplier business run in efficient manner. There are a lot of things happening in the power sector, as everybody knows that the new market mechanism with traders and suppliers and the regulatory regime being developed, the new business concepts are going to happen. We are very cognizant with the new set of challenges that's going to happen, particularly at the government end. As I already highlighted, that we have to ensure the liquidity in the power sector. If this liquidity is not there, the public sector is not going to sustain anymore, and this is where we are very concerned. And this is primarily a concern of the distribution companies who have challenged the wheeling regulations. Though being a regulator, we feel that we have to promote concept in Pakistan if you want the market to flourish. However, in the doing so, we're also cognizant of the fact that we have to make a win-win situation for everyone. We can't create a situation where one stakeholder of the market gets full benefits, whereas the other segment start getting hitting due to certain market mechanisms. We need to satisfy our stakeholders, whether it's a transmission network operator, whether it's a distribution network operator, whether it's a power sector purchaser like the CPPA, and as well as the private sector companies who are operating in the sector. And win-win situation can only be created if we provide every stakeholder certain breadth to live with. Coming back to renewable energy, as it is stated in the policy, we are now switching over to competitive bidding, and IGCEP is taken as a Bible for that. The IGCEP is already in, we are reviewing it, and we are hopeful that something concrete will come out, and soon our determination will be issued. However, for the competitive bidding under the new policy, it is mandatory that we should identify the location where the bidding is to be done and where the power plants have to be connected. These locations are required by the system planner as well, so that it can work out under the new IGCEP iterations that where the new capacity is going to come up. And this is where the AEDB and the provincial governments have a very good role to play. They have to identify the locations, they have to develop the RFP documents, they have to develop the bilateral contracts and so forth, and so that the market is up and ready for new competition that's going to be coming up. We are very cognizant to the fact that globally the tariffs of the renewable powers are drastically reducing. We have seen recently in Central Asia and Latin America that the tariff from the new solar energy has come down to nearly 1 cent per kilowatt hour. And this is all just because of the beauty of the competitive bidding. And this is what we want to see here in power market of Pakistan as well. That in future, due to the price reductions and new market mechanism, new financing instruments, the price of renewable power is going to come down a lot. We feel the future is for renewables. We see the future calls for the green electricity, and this is where the sustainability of overall country lies. However, in order to ensure that, we have to be very cautious and very pragmatic, as well as we need to ensure that each and every stakeholder, including the public sector entities and the private sector, should have a win-win situation at all levels. Given that there are certain options available in the ARE policy, and we are eagerly looking at, like the geothermal, hydrogen-based generation, waste to energy, and other new resources like solar thermal. These are the areas where we have to work with all the stakeholders and make these options available for the country. We feel that there are certain options under the renewable energy regime that can be used as a sustainably baseload kind of situation, and these base loads can be taken forward for sustainable grid operations. Just to highlight a couple of we are very cognizant with regards to the grid code operations and the commercial code operations, because these are two very important elements that will be a key for up and running the power market. Grid code is now being revised. We are taking into consideration the new market mechanisms, as well as the HVDC systems, the regional connectivity, and all other supplier mechanisms, supplier distribution mechanisms as are coming up in the market. And soon you will, stakeholders will see a first iteration of the revised grid code. And I feel the stakeholders will be very comfortable with the technological interventions that have been introduced in the new grid code. Similarly, battery energy storage systems, this is nowadays debate in NEPRA. We feel that battery energy storage systems will be having a huge success coming days, and it will be an option that can integrate it with the renewable power plants and enable those variable renewable energy resources to supply stable streamed electricity. For that purpose, we are under discussion with the global stakeholders how we can bring in the codes and the standards that will enable the market creation for this kind of solution. And we are hopeful, as the prices of battery energy storage will become compatible, these solutions will become available in power market as well.
Dr. Irfan, in the interest of time, if I could request you to kind of wind us there. Thank you. Thank you.
With all these things, I would say that regulator is very well cognizant and well informed about the things that are happening. We'll be happy to receive good suggestions, good interventions that would enable creating a sustainable power market. However, in all things, we have to ensure that we should create win-win for everyone, for the public sector and the private sector as well. With that, I will try to I will close my speech, and again, thankful to all who had listened to me, and I believe we'll together work for the betterment of Pakistan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Irfan. Very insightful perspective from the regulatory authority, and a lot of information. With this, I would like to move on and invite Mr. Oliver Knight, Senior Energy Specialist from the World Bank. He's been serving in the South Asia Energy Unit at the World Bank, leading the Synth Solar Energy Project and a number of related technical assistant projects on renewable energy development in Pakistan. He's also an author of the Variable Renewable Energy Sources Study, just recently been published with great findings that we would like to hear about. So Oliver, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the invite. I think this is a very good and timely initiative, and we're obviously very happy to contribute our prior analysis, and also we have quite a bit of ongoing analysis and work that's underway. Also very good to see quite a few familiar faces on my screen here. I'm actually scheduled to move to Islamabad in a couple of months, so very much looking forward to getting more deeply involved in these discussions and in the sector. So thank you for highlighting the VRE. VRE is variable renewable energy. So when we talk about that, we mean essentially solar and wind, to distinguish it from hydel. We published our VRE integration and planning study, which actually took around 2 years to carry out. It was done very closely with NTDC planning. But since then, as probably everybody is aware, some of the findings have been overtaken by events. And as a result, the IGCEP, which is the most recent one, shows that the targets in the new ARE policy will not be met on current projections. And that's really based down to slow growth in electricity demand combined with the existing quite large commitments to new capacity, quite a lot of which is thermal. So the situation isn't quite as we described it back then, but I think the key conclusions in that report still remain valid. So let me just highlight the ones that I think still spring out, even if the figures themselves will have changed. And so in that sense, the IGCEP you can see as the government's current iteration as to where the country needs to go, but the conclusions that we came to at a higher level, I think, are still valid. So firstly, much more VRE, solar and wind, represents at least cost capacity expansion for Pakistan. And going to at least 30% based on current prices, adding then hydel on top of that, that would represent the optimal pathway on cost and on cost reduction, in fact. So really putting as much VRE on the system as quickly as possible, bearing in mind those constraints I mentioned, should be a top priority. In addition, the other key finding was that adding that quantity of VRE can be integrated by the system without incurring excessive system costs. So this is something that can now technically be done. There are some investments required, such as SCADA 3, in fact, urgently required, but essentially the system will be able to handle this level of VRE, but some additional things need to change and be added. VRE can also mitigate delays on hydel projects, and as we all know, those projects are very complex. They are subject to delay, and solar can be constructed very quickly. So it's a great option in that kind of case. So doing all this, continuing with the hydel expansion and adding lots of VRE would slow and then reverse the growth that we're seeing in GHG emissions and transition Pakistan to a low carbon electricity system. And I think that seems to be the topic of this event, and certainly is something the rest of the world is moving in that direction, and Pakistan needs to make sure it isn't left out of that. We also did a scenario under that study that shows that 100% renewable energy, that would be hydel plus VRE, is possible in the medium term and not at excessive cost. So if you're interested in what that looks like, you can look at the study. The concept note I was sent for this event highlighted 5 issues, and I actually thought it would be helpful to you because it looks like you're kind of exploring some work in this area, just to go over those, because I actually felt quite a few of those were not the key issue right now. So firstly, you highlighted lack of grid capacity and infrastructure. In our view, that's not a major constraint. Obviously, investment is needed on that, but actually a lot can be done on VRE now without any investment in grid capacity and infrastructure. You also highlighted data gaps in the potential for RE. Actually, there's plenty of data available. We've published the Global Solar Atlas and the Global Wind Atlas. You can look those up, they're free. And there's plenty of data out there. So I think people should, data is not an issue anymore. And this is something that developers can easily get their hands on, government can get their hands on, etc. Lack of institutional coordination and bureaucratic delays. Well, okay, they may exist, but they're not the key problem right now. I think it would be my take. Actually, there's quite a lot going on. And the key issue right now, of course, is this surplus capacity issue and getting moving on competitive bidding. Lack of enabling conditions and regulations to encourage private sector, etc. And I think the point here is the policy is actually now very clear. And there's a good regulatory environment, but there is a need, and this point did mention mini grids and rooftop solar. There is a need for provincial government intervention, particularly on electricity access. So that's definitely a gap. And yes, on rooftop solar, I would say that perhaps NEPRA also and CPPA and others need to take a look at the incentive structure there to make sure it's fair to everybody. And then finally, mobilizing finance was mentioned as a kind of potential issue barrier. From what I can see, that is not a constraint, and there are plenty of investors keen to invest in Pakistan's power sector. So, yeah, I think if the right policies are in place and the government is serious and puts out competitive bidding, you'll get plenty of people willing to and interested in investing. So let me just move on to a few considerations. I think from our point of view, it's important that the country doesn't sit back while it's in surplus and then, you know, have this cycle whereby everyone kind of relaxes and then in 5 years there's another crisis. So it's really important to be planning for the future. The annual IGCEP process is very encouraging in this regard, and continuing with that and having those regular updates is critical. To give one example, to meet these longer term targets, for example, to get to 30% BRE, you really do need to start looking at opening up very large scale solar and wind parks in Balochistan. And we did a locational study that came after the study you mentioned that explores this in detail. That requires a long timeline. And to do that kind of very ambitious investment in Balochistan, you would need to be starting 5 years before you want the power. So, you know, let's also be very careful that these kinds of longer term projects, even while the country is in a comfortable situation now on capacity, those longer term projects are not neglected because they do take a long time to come to fruition. Thirdly, really critical to initiate competitive bidding. And of course, AEDB is working on this. We're actually, with them, we'll be launching a study looking at this issue in detail in the next few months. And we have a project with Government of Sindh that could demonstrate competitive bidding immediately because transaction advisors are already employed. So this is really critical now. It's been talked about for several years, and it's really important now to show it in action. And then finally, we do need to consider what is happening in the field of distributed generation, in particular rooftop solar. I think it may be important, and we're exploring this right now, to look at measures that would make it fairer and more sustainable from the DISCO perspective. So, you know, one needs to look at the long-term sustainability of net metering and perhaps making some changes there while still ensuring a return to those that want to do rooftop solar. So it still needs to be attractive, but not too attractive. I think the final set of points, and then I'll be finished, is to look at, because you're interested in decarbonization, for deeper decarbonization in Pakistan, one needs to think well beyond the power sector. We actually did some analysis recently, and I think perhaps many people in the room know this already, but the majority of coal use, for example, in Pakistan is in industry, not in power. And that will even be the case when these new plants come online. So one needs to be looking well beyond the power sector, essentially industry, transport, and residential, to really start looking at decarbonization in depth. A few things that come out of that. Firstly, energy efficiency must be scaled up. There are plenty of quick wins, and we've been working with Nika on this. And I think the key point here is not to look at it from a decarbonization point of view, but doing energy efficiency strengthens productivity and competitiveness, particularly of industry. And in the public sector, it can reduce circular debt. So energy efficiency is something that just really has to be tackled in every country, and Pakistan has a lot of low-hanging fruit. Secondly, there is an opportunity to consider electrification of hard-to-abate sectors, in particular in industry, but also electrifying more of residential demand. And if you combine that with electric vehicles, you could really increase electricity demand in the medium term. And since we're talking about a country that's right now in surplus, increasing electricity demand is not a bad thing to do, particularly if you're reducing emissions at the same time. Two final things. The member of planning mentioned both of these, but they're critical. Solar irrigation, big issue. We've been talking to the government of Balochistan about that, and really trying to make sure that any effort to do solar irrigation understands how to tackle all of the issues involved there, including over extraction of water and O&M for the solar systems. It's not just about putting a solar pump out in a rural area. It's about making sure that that actually works for the next 20 years. That's really hard to get right, but there are some interesting lessons from India and also some very good thinking that's been happening in Pakistan recently. And then finally, energy access, electricity access in particular. We're starting to look at that in more depth. We're carrying out right now a comprehensive energy survey of Pakistan that will include a household energy survey. And We've also commissioned a least cost electrification plan study. And so that will be looking at, does it make sense to do grid extension, mini grids, or solar home systems, depending on where those unelectrified communities are. And we've been doing that in coordination with ADB and the provinces and the discos. So that's going to be very exciting work. And I think it's an area that does need to be looked into, although it's not maybe critical to decarbonization, but it's critical to many, many people who don't have power right now. So with that, let me finish. And thank you very much for the invite, and very keen to be part of this conversation going forward. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Oliver. Rightly pointed out the critical areas to look at for decarbonization, industry, transport, for electrification, energy efficiency to increase and strengthen the competitiveness, and solar irrigation and energy access remains the biggest area that needs to be looked at and explore further. So moving forward, I think the best person to have his interventions would be Mr. Akil Jaffrey, who is a Director of Policy and International Cooperation from Alternative Energy Development Board, ADB. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Hina. It is indeed a pleasure to be a part of this discussion, and thank SDPI for providing this opportunity to me. I'll be brief with my comments because most of the things have been talked about by the previous panelists, the interventions being made, the plans of the government, and some of the limitations that we have. Well, I'll start with saying that we have around 2,000 megawatts of renewable installed, with around 810 megawatts of wind and solar power under construction. Although it took us 15 years to reach this stage, and there were a lot of roadblocks and hurdles that we had to overcome, which also included the high cost of renewables at that point in time as compared to the prices of renewables that we see nowadays. But I think under the previous policy, we have laid a good foundation stone from where we can take the quantum leap towards, increasing the share at a swift pace and meeting the targets which seem to be ambitious in the new energy ARE policy 2019. But still, as previous panelists mentioned, and as Oliver highlighted, that we still have some limitations with us. One of the biggest limitation being the surplus capacity for a couple of years ahead, and the transition we are into at the moment from the single buyer market to the wholesale electricity market. At the same time, there are some certain transformations required in the distribution system, and there, as Oliver mentioned, that a couple of studies have already been carried out with the support of World Bank that highlight and make recommendation as to what transformations are required in the distribution network and in how we manage the grid. For example, you mentioned about SCADA, and then we need to apply the latest forecasting techniques being done globally in order to manage the variability of the renewables, coupled with the capacity building of the organizations that are looking after these this work of managing the grid. And these interventions are required even if we don't have much of renewables coming in, because in order to have a sustainable power supply and a stable power network, we need the SCADA and the other intervention and the transformation of the distribution network in any way. With these in place, I'm sure we'll be able to meet the targets of the policy. there are, apart from these limiting, what we generally talk about are the large scale projects and the limitations we have in meeting developing large scale projects in the country. But most of the time, there are a lot of developments going on in the country in which deployments of renewable energy solutions are being made, which go under the radar. Net metering has been talked about. As of now, I think we have the total numbers of consumers has reached more than 13,000 with consumers with the quantum of 210 megawatts installed for net metering, as compared to and only in the last year we have seen an addition of 7,000 consumers applying for net metering. So there's a huge demand and influx of these deployments in the country. And apart from that, a lot of installations are being done under the radar, because most of these installations are B2B interventions, and which are being supported and by the state bank. The state bank's RE financing scheme has surely played the role of a catalyst in promoting these interventions. These interventions are tens in number and ranging from 1 to 2 megawatts up to 10, 15 megawatts on B2B basis. And the numbers, if you see the import numbers from FBR and the customs authorities, they are staggering, like 2,000 megawatts of panel being imported in a single year, whereas we only have a couple of 100 megawatts of solar projects under construction. So these are being utilized in captive generation for B2B transactions, for projects being done by the provincial governments for provision of electricity to MOS, basic health units in different constituencies and in different districts. So a lot of deployments are being done. And I believe that once the CTB-SIM, the wholesale market is evolved and it's set in place, this will also fast track these B2B transactions and other modes of deployments other than the large scale projects that are being deployed. Irfan also talked about mini and microgrids. That is the new area which the new area policy also talks about, and we want to have participation of the active participation of the private sector in mini and microgrids, especially in Balochistan and other areas of good areas of the country. And there are studies that also identify that new solar and other renewable installations are also feasible for the tail end of the distribution network where we have voltage problems. So I think going forward, once CTB-SIM is set in place, this will pave the way for the much more private investment in the sector, and B2B transactions being done, weaning of energy based on renewables being done. But NEPRA has to take a close look, and in the initial years has to handhold these sort of interventions going forward. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Yes, sorry. So thank you so much. Thank you for your great interventions. Moving on, I would like to give a floor to Mr. Ashraf Hassan Rana. He's a director, Bridge Factor, a consultancy working on working in financial and strategic services in the energy and infrastructure sectors. So over to you, sir.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk on this forum. I won't take too much of your time. The beauty of being one of the last people to talk is that people are tired, they're sleepy. Lunch is being served. So like, and I won't bore you for too long. And the good thing is that majority of the good points have already been explained and deliberated upon by other panelists. So let me start by first congratulating NTDC for doing a brilliant job on IGSAP. IGSAP has been a long time coming, for like since 2005. Finally, it's come in. I don't like it. I'm a proponent of renewable energy, so I'm not really appreciative of the share that's been given to renewable. However, it's a basic statement of facts. That's what we've been lacking for the last 20 years. Every government that comes in is in a firefighting situation. They don't plan. The supply is not it's always a supply-driven. It's always a supply-driven solution that we're given rather than a demand-driven solution. For the first time in our history, we've got a plan. IGSAP is really a plan. I don't think even a policy is supposed to be higher than a IGSAP, but IGSAP really lays down what the reality is. The reality is that the government of Pakistan, this one, previous one, or the one before, have given commitments on certain projects, be it a coal power project, imported coal, or indigenous coal, or any other project for that matter. That's the fact. The fact is that they've committed to it and they have to implement that. And I agree with IGSAP as far as that commitments are concerned. These are the commitments that have to be, they're sovereign commitments and they have to be followed. One can argue whether one project was included or not. However, this is the best one could do. And I think from the highest forums on the government, which is CCOE and the cabinet, the assumptions for the IGSAP were approved. It wasn't any NTDC work. And DC just put that together, put them in Plexos. Plexos, is a brilliant software. It came down that in the next 10 years, our generation capacity is going to increase from 34 to 54,000 megawatt, 20,000 megawatt increase. However, majority of that's going to be, around about 88% is going to be taken up by committed projects, irrespective of the price. On the price basis, there's only 12% project coming in, which is 2,000 megawatt of wind and 250 megawatt of solar, which gives us enough space, but not really what I would ideally like. However, this is the fact. So that's where we are. We're not, as Oliver was saying, we're not into decarbonization. We like to state that, and I think this forum is based on that as well, that we want to transition to clean energy. That's not it. It's basically economics. Renewable energy, which is classically wind and solar, is the most cheapest form of energy right now. So they get priority over things. Yes, base load is one other matter, but being in surplus energy situation, base load doesn't matter. We already have too much base load. So renewable energy, which is variable in nature, is something that we need. So to the basic point, I'm trying to make over here is that, for the next 10 years, there's limited capacity for renewables that are going to come in, wind and solar. We need to concentrate on them. We need to concentrate on getting the auction right, which is going to be key proponent of this whole puzzle. We need to remember that this is not the first time auction is happening in Pakistan. We keep on forgetting that PPIB has attempted doing auctions in thermals back in late 2010 and 2012 actually, which were flawed, and they were disastrous results. Nothing happened on that. Then PDO did another initiative of doing auction in hydro, which is a difficult matter, but they did attempt that, and that was again a disaster. It didn't really happen. So we need the whole world is doing auctions, and they've always had good results on that. So in order to make renewables, auctions and renewables successful in Pakistan, we have to be a little careful because of our disastrous history, and not try one mode. It might be good to try different modes of auction rather than doing one mode of a grid-based auction. It might be suitable to try site-based auctions as well, in order to see which is more suitable to our economy and our power sector. I think that's where I'm coming from. And I think there's tremendous opportunity in Pakistan, but we need to first, the direction has been given by the relevant stakeholders, which is the government of Pakistan through its entities, NTDC, CBPA, which have done a good job in putting the IGSAP. We just need to implement that. There will be slippages, and it has to be done every year. There will be slippages probably in the hydro sector, and those can be taken care of by introducing solar, which is a very rapid deployment situation. One thing that I like to mention over here is that we need to understand the dilemma being faced. We're all proponents of renewable energy. We want rooftop solar. We want wheeling. We want a lot of other things which the West is doing, and they're getting very good results on that. But we need to also understand the dilemma that's being faced by CBPA. I've had numerous discussions with them, and we need to be sympathetic to them. What they say is very, very it's a fact. We're in a service situation. We've got to, if we don't run those plants, we'll have to pay capacity payments. And if the demand reduces, the capacity payment or the price per electron of electricity is going to increase, which really makes me think that if we go for rooftop solar and households, or we do solar for industry and wheeling and all those things, the end result for that, as per CPP's interpretation, is that the cost burden on the poor population of Pakistan will increase. So rooftop solar on households, that's, only those people will put it up who can afford that, which is the highest rate of our economy. Number two, industries will take advantage of that. They'll get more efficient. They will get lesser production cost, which will help exports or their profits for that matter. But what happens when you take out good customers from the CPPA system or the network? The burden and the cost of the flawed decision making by the previous governments comes down to the poor people and who can't really afford. So that will result in not decreasing the circular debt. That I think will increase circular debt, because there will be more theft, because people, the electricity is no more a luxury, it's a necessity. So people need that and they will take it. Now, when they can't pay for it because it gets so expensive, there'll be theft. And your circular debt would actually increase rather than decreasing. So that's the perspective the CPP is doing, and it's actually right. They put in a couple of petitions in NEPRA stating that if you want to enable net metering, or for that matter, wheeling, there needs to be a charge for the system, because the system was set up for them. And if they want to get out of it, there has to be a fixed charge for them. And I think, rather than hiding away from the solution and, closing our eyes to this is a fact. And the regulatory authority needs to take a cognizant fact of that and make a decision that if they want to promote wheeling, a certain fee has to be paid to the grid, or the grid operator, not to grid operator, but CPPA for that matter, to subsidize the electricity, which is going to be more expensive for the poor. And same thing for the rooftop solars, exactly the same thing. I think a reasonable charge needs to be done to be able to develop our market. And that's the emphasis of my discussion. And this is 2 cents that I could put in on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ashraf Saab, for your interventions in identifying the opportunities, challenges, and the way forward, and for your valuable time today to join us. Next, I would like to give a floor to Engineer Asad Mahmood, Manager Technical NICA. He has been a mechanical engineer. He's a mechanical engineer by profession and is associated with the renewable energy and energy efficiency sector since the last 15 years. Without any further ado, I would like to request Mr. Asad to give his interventions on the role of NICA in this renewable energy technologies and capacity to the pathway for the Pakistan. Can you hear us? Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak in the presence of eminent speakers, which have discussed mostly about the electricity or power sector aspects when we talk about clean energy transition. And Mr. Oliver also tried to give a touch to other sectors and low carbon scenarios, which NICA, in fact, as per its mandate given in the NICA Act, is already looking at or have already demonstrated in different sectors. So, so there are 5 sectors which the department has been mandated to look at: is industry, agriculture, transports, building, and power sector. So, so that is something like where our focus is definitely on setting some targets for our department through the strategic plan to look at and to give some future forecasting scenarios, because we are directly linked up with the demand side scenarios which everybody is trying to produce. So we will be having the statistics as per our mandate, how many new ACs, how many refrigerators. So everything that is going to come up in the industry, and that is going to trigger the demand. So that realistic scenario would help the power policy makers also to a certain the uptake or intake of new power accordingly and how to manage it. So, so coupling it with this title of this panel discussion, renewable energy. So renewable energy, as we say that it's the flip side of energy efficiency when we talk about fuel switching options and to reduce the electricity cost and to increase the productivity. It's good that the standardization aspect has been looked into that. But one of the element which is going to act as a catalyst in terms of net metering aspects is as we are trying to bring into mandatory measures. So one of the section is the energy conservation building code, which we have to implement. And that code is definitely going to have some section related to mandatory installation of renewable energy technologies, and it includes solar as well. So that is something like the development authorities and have to work closely with the relevant distribution company authorities having jurisdiction in that area, that how much uptake is possible in those areas if we really go to give the percentage to every building, commercial building that is coming up in next 5 years or 10 years, like in Building Control Authority, LDA, and there are other Tehsil Municipal Association authorities where they have their own building bylaws and things like that. So in order to bring coherence between various bylaws and rules and regulations, the provinces are also going to be channelized, and the channels are also going to be used through our provincial designated agencies, which are already there. And as you can see, like the opportunities lie there for the solar panel manufacturers and the installers. And so the important thing is like the after sales services aspects and things like that, which a normal consumer will have been facing and will face as well down the line once the life cycle of these panels are going to get completed. I think Madam from EPA, who is also working on the electronic waste segment, is also, they are also like looking into with the Ministry of Climate Change, this specific aspect of electronic waste, and including the solar and other solar PV panels and other things into it. So the challenges that would come up for the implementation of the building code is definitely like how much targets we can give to the new buildings that are coming up, and it will definitely add to their capex, and whether the utility provider is willing to take it or not, as there are ambiguities in the market that there might be different upcoming regulations that will come up, and the present net metering financing transactions or how the billing is done these days, that could be altered, keeping in view the government priorities and the capacity charges which are piling up. So holistic sense and holistic perspective definitely is there. And then one of the challenges to renewable energy is in most of the industries which we have in some cases, like they have installed the panels, PV panels, and they are like cutting they have thrashed their energy bills as well. But it has led to, like in some cases, it has led to increase in productivity, but on the other side, it also changed the behavioral aspects of the consumers. Like they think that it's free of cost, this price is much less, and replacement of energy efficient motors and things like that. That also somehow a sort of barrier is also there coming up, or one can foresee if the holistic behavioral aspect is not looked into it. In evening or night time, when the solar insulation, enough insulation is not there, or battery storage system is not there, so that inefficient appliance is definitely going to trigger the bill of that company or industry. But a general perspective in homes, or even with the people, children, we communicated in the schools during the school campaigns. They say that we have solar, so we are the kids' perception was like their electricity is free, and they need not to switch off the lights, they need not to. So that is also in parallel very much essential. On one side, if we are pushing renewable energy, clean energy, free source of energy, so the behavioral aspect also has to be looked into, because the solar is not it is intermittently available and it's not there throughout the day. And then coming into other alternate technologies like biofuels, biomass, like we have developed a success story in zigzag kilns, like energy transition is there, or energy primary energy reduction is there in terms of coal, and demonstrated it through practical case studies across Punjab and conversion of the kilns through zigzag methodology of firing combustion efficiency and things like that. So another thing is, like, from electrical side, we have very good potential, but we talk about renewable energy from thermal perspective. We don't have enough capacity, I felt, like at the grassroots level, which can deal with the thermal scenarios. So the capacity building initiatives as a way forward in the thermal side, be it be combustion technologies, be it be alternate or biomass crops or things like that. We have it in the formal sector, but informal sector, that accounts as one of the major consumer as well. They are mostly overlooked, and no hand holding is given to such geographically spread in SMEs or medium and small enterprises. So I think as a way forward, we also need to give a hand holding to them. And one of the positive aspects through renewable energy is, like, people can start consuming more as well, or due to the energy efficient items. So it's like a rebound effect of energy efficiency is foreseen in the coming scenario as well. So this rebound effect can push and trigger the demand of electricity as well, and it also increases the demand of bringing in more energy efficient equipments into the market. So there are very different interesting scenarios which our Plexos software, or we have asked we have suggested that to be included in the IGCEP report as well, the different scenarios regarding bringing in the energy efficient appliances. Although there is an organic growth, but still, like, the quality and the scientific record based, evidence based projections, definitely NICA has a vital role in it, and together with DISCOs and power planners, I think that could give a really true sense of upcoming demand projections, and we can definitely set the course for future as far as the power sector is concerned, but because other sectors I haven't discussed about the energy related aspects in thermal side of industry or transport, or how we are focusing on the tune-up centers of vehicles or oil marketing companies. We are interacting with Uber, Careem. So we have spread our cards across the board and trying to prioritize the things where they click up, and ultimate the push is towards promoting the green energy financing, just like the solar or renewable energy windows are there effectively functioning. So energy efficiency window has yet to be opened, and through this platform as a way forward, I think that we would be able to at least make it open. And I wish that after that one window, there are going to be no 1,000 doors to be opened then. So thank you very much on this note.
Thank you so much, Asad, for your insights, and especially recommendations to be included in the IGCEP regarding the energy conservation and the software that you mentioned. Like, so to be able to holistically include all the required sectors and the components that needs to be part of the power planning. With this, I would like to end this session 3 with special thanks to all the esteemed panelists who have taken out their time and have joined us and have contributed so well to this discussion. And that was actually the purpose of this discussion, to engage all the relevant stakeholders and get their perspective, and to help us understand how we can actually take all those mechanisms and all those strategies forward to make this clean energy transition a success for Pakistan. With this, thank you so much for now. We will be back in 5 minutes with starting the thematic sessions that are basically based on the key recommendations we had from the research studies we have launched this morning. So the thematic sessions is basically on the potential role of Chinese leadership and investment priorities in clean energy transition of Pakistan. And along with that, we will have 2 sessions, Green CPEC, leveraging green financing and low carbon development, and the green financing strategies in terms of priorities for clean energy investments, energy climate nexus. So we'll be joining, we'll be coming back shortly